In a nation marked by both resilience and challenges, the highly anticipated speech from the throne delivered by the esteemed Governor-General Cynthia Pratt Wednesday paints a vivid picture of a country at a crossroads. The Bahamas, a nation mourning the loss of a respected member of its cabinet, stands united under the shared vision of progress. The backdrop is one of struggle. A nation also still recovering from the ravages of the COVID-19 pandemic, grappling with economic crises and facing the harsh realities of climate change. But within this adversity, hope emerges, intertwined with determination and resolve. The Davis administration's blueprint for change has been its guiding light, and whether you believe it's showing results may depend on where you fall on either side of the political divide. The speech from the throne points to the recent budget communication that reveals impressive economic growth figures, with real GDP growth recorded at 14.4%. But for many struggling, it's not all about numbers. The government has laid out a comprehensive agenda that encompasses personal, economic, and national security. Tonight, we'll delve into these areas with two young, vibrant leaders who will give their take on the new fiscal roadmap that sets the tone of this new legislative session. Welcome to On the Record, the speech from the throne, a senator's take. I'm your host, Jerome Sawyer. Tonight's guests, Senators Quinton Lightbourne and Michaela Barnett Ellis. Stay with us as On the Record gets started on the other side of this break. So the project really pays itself back.
Correct.
They set up
at the conference, the school.
As a journalist, I always have to focus on the facts, and sometimes that means going to investigate for myself. On the Record, Thursdays at 8 p.m. right here on RTV.
This is On the Record, and tonight we are pleased to welcome Progressive Liberal Party Senator Quinton Lightbourne and Free National Movement Senator Michaela Barnett Ellis. Folks, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Glad to have you on. We chose you specifically because we wanted to have a different type of discussion, and we certainly hope that that's what we are able to achieve this evening. So again, welcome and thank you for coming. Well, a new legislative agenda focused on job expansion, ownership in the economy, and a spotlight on the poor. The opening of Parliament's speech from the throne reveals the government's refocused agenda. Governor-General Cynthia Pratt delivering her first speech from the throne at the opening of Parliament.
The opening of Parliament session getting off to a somber start, with parliamentarians paying respect to Social Services, Broadcasting and Information Minister Obi Wilchcombe. House Speaker Patricia DeVoe telling parliamentarians his presence to her right will be missed.
No longer can I look to my immediate right and see the familiar face that always gave me his signature smiles, the presence of his calm spirit, and of course, that assuring nod that signals to me that everything was going to be okay.
Wilchcombe also served as leader of government business. He will be replaced by National Security Minister Wayne Munro. The procedures were eventually followed by the reading of the speech from the throne by newly minted Governor-General Cynthia Mother Pratt. The speech focused on 5 key pillars: cost of living, education, crime, healthcare, and jobs. The plan is to expand jobs and opportunities, but also promote economic ownership.
My government will establish in law a downtown management authority to oversee the continued revitalization of downtown Nassau.
The Davis administration also plans to implement a public service reform bill. Then there's the promise to improve health care.
My government prioritizes public health, mental health and wellness initiatives, and is moving aggressively to implement the second phase of national health insurance.
They also promised to repeal and replace the current Stem Cell Act to tighten its regulatory framework. It's a piece of legislation passed under the former Christie administration. There was also the promise of a National Development Plan bill, amendments to the Supreme Court Act to make way for 5 new justices, and this promise on cannabis.
New opportunities will be created by legislation regulating cannabis and hemp.
Now you can expect pieces of legislation to address those key points outlined in the speech from the throne to be tabled in Parliament as soon as they meet again. Reporting for Our News, I'm Berthany McDermott.
Well, the opening Parliament of session getting off to a somber start with parliamentarians paying respect to Social Services, Broadcasting and Information Minister Obi Wilshcombe. Of course, we saw that in that story with our Berthany McDermott. We also saw both houses of Parliament honouring the life of Social Services Minister Wilshcombe during the opening. His death, a major blow for the country. His absence certainly leaving a void, as mentioned by House Speaker Patricia DeVoe. Quinton, I'm going to begin with you because I know you had a personal relationship with him. What was it like for you yesterday, sitting there, looking around and know Obi Wilshcombe?
So it definitely was like a surreal moment, to see and realize his absence. His absence was felt because the role that he's been able to play in such a meaningful way in both in West End, in Bimini, and also in the parliamentary capacity, he's shown his legacy is secured. And it's something that I think, must stand true to who he was. He was always a person of one love and empowerment and helping. And so seeing that absence yesterday really was felt. And I'm sure that parliamentary colleagues on both sides of the divide felt it and understood his contribution, not just to the country, but definitely to Parliament.
Michaela, it's, I saw from the very beginning the opposition party, your party, expressing condolences. But the reality is everybody's now looking towards the by-election because the seat has to be filled. How do you strike that balance between knowing what's coming but still being sensitive to the moment?
Minister Wilshcombe was, at least for me, a person who, from the moment I became a parliamentarian, extended himself and was always gracious and cordial, and we shared our fair amount of jokes during the time that we spent together. And it's remembering that although we were political adversaries, there was still an element of courtesy and congeniality. One of the things that struck me most about him was that he was for a better Bahamas. Mm-hmm. That was, party politics aside, we all want the Bahamas to be a better place. And I think the best tribute we can give to his legacy is to continue to strive for a better Bahamas, because that's what he wanted at the end of the day. So part of the question, though, was politically, how do you've got to move forward. Yes. But when to move forward and how, and how to do it in a sensitive way? We're in a period of mourning. Mm-hmm. There's going to be a state funeral. There's going to be a burial. And I think, once we have finished those formalities and get a sense of closure, that we're then in a better position to move forward and turn our minds to the next thing. What's next? That's, one of those incredible things about life. You have to keep calm and carry on.
Sure.
And so, we remember him, we honor him, and then, we move on.
Quinton, is this the same thing within the party? I know there's already a discussion about what's next, but striking that right balance.
Well, striking the right balance is very delicate. As you stated, you have to understand the respect and the due that he deserves. And as they go about that process in terms of the burial and the funeral, all those stuff, and then realizing, but one thing I know about Minister Wilshcombe very well is that he understood parliamentary process, he understood politics, and he would understand and realize that once those stuff are done, it's game on. And he has been a statesman, someone that I, as a younger politician, looked at. Is someone that set the tone and set a great example for so many young persons in politics. And I think, striking that balance is very delicate. but also understanding that knowing him and persons that had the privilege of knowing him would know that he would want us to carry on his legacy and ensure that the seat of West End and Bimini is fully, represented.
Sure. All right, so now let's move into the meat of the discussion, the speech from the throne, which outlines a strategic roadmap focusing on 3 pillars: personal, economic, and national security. These pillars said to be the cornerstone of a future where Bahamians are not just surviving, but thriving. Do you believe this is true after what you've heard yesterday?
Yes, I do believe that is true, and especially as a young person listening to the speech from the throne, an emphasis, or a great deal of emphasis, was focused on youth development in terms of the National Youth Guard that was implemented through the Ministry of Youth, Sports and Culture. And it just shows that for a transition in terms of generational improvements, that we will be able to see that a National Youth Service is implemented in our country and move forward. Even with the enshrinement pretty much of law that making the Rangers program a part of the Royal Bahamas Defense Force as a youth program, instead of not just putting these programs in place and after a while they dwindle, but also ingrain them into the institution of our country and our organizations, because I think that is very important, and we must focus, as the Governor General stated, on security. We must ensure that we secure our borders, secure our minds, secure our future in so many different facets. So it's not just the security sense where persons think, it's defending, but it's also securing our future for our children and ensuring that the groundwork is laid for future development.
Michael, your thoughts on what we laid out, what those major pillars are that were outlined yesterday in the speech?
Well, obviously, I have a different view on the speech from the throne. I thought that it was more of the same. For me, what stood out were the pieces that were missing. A lot of items were repeated, helping the economy, strengthening our borders. I mean, I think that's the equivalent of, a beauty pageant contestant saying, "And we want world peace." But what struck out to me was the fact that things were missing. They had promised to bring anti-corruption legislation in the first 100 days. We're approaching 750 days, and that legislation has not been brought, and there's been no mention of it. The Blueprint for Change and the first speech from the throne talked about the Freedom of Information Act. Again, that hasn't been brought, and there's been no mention of it in the legislation. There was conversation about a sovereign wealth fund and the building code. And so what was interesting to me were the things that were in the blueprint and in the first speech from the throne that have been left out in this speech of the throne.
But do you accept, though, that even the previous administration talked about a Freedom of Information Act, talked about anti-corruption legislation, and here we are in 2023 having the exact same discussion.
They promised us a new day. They promised us a new day, and they promised us that they would do the things that the previous administration ignored and left behind. And we're still continuing to see more of the same. And I think, particularly as young people in this generation, we want our politicians to do what they're going to say they're going to do, and we want our politicians to give us realistic promises. Promising us the world when we all know you can't give it to us? Come on. We're
going to delve a little bit more into the opposition's response, but I'll allow Quinton to respond to that when you hear more of the same.
Yeah.
But we will spend some more time on that. Though.
In response to that, when I hear more of the same, we're talking about a previous administration that neglected so many facets of our social fabric. In terms of being able, this government, in little over 2.5 years now, has restored the economy, has been able to open up schools, has been able to increase our minimum wage, has signed 22 industrial agreements in over 22 months, right? And over 2.5 years. And so we're seeing and we're doing these change. One of the things that Senator Ellis spoke about was that the first 100 days in our Blueprint for Change, and I remember I personally gave Senator a blueprint. We did not have a first 100 days inside this plan. We had ideas in terms of what we're going to achieve, and most of our goals that we said that we're going to achieve, we've already successfully achieved them. And so as we continue to move forward, the demographic in terms of the populace is so different now, is that we want to see accountability, we want to see action. And so far, this government has been able to show that we have a government of action.
All right. Well, the speech also outlined plans to regulate various sectors, including the energy sector. I wanted to spend a little bit of time on this. Were you happy to see this, especially considering the power supply issues that we continue to face countrywide? Senator Elizabeth, I'll start with you.
So I was pleased to hear about renewable energy and LNG and those plans with regard to improving the cost of electricity for Bahamians. One of the things that I would like to see is an amendment to the Electricity Act, which requires all homes to be on the grid. And if we're really going to do renewable energy, you should allow me to make my house solar or wind power or something else, which means that I have to be off the grid or find a way that I can feed that excess energy that I produce, power that I produce, back into the grid. And so it needs to be a holistic approach to solving the problem. Let's make it easier for consumers to also benefit from renewable energy.
All right.
Yes. So the present administration has approved a 100 megawatt plant inside Nassau to improve and reduce the cost of electricity. This is something as my role also as the Bahamas Development Bank, realizing the importance of the green economy. And these are steps that are being, I visited Jamaica and I went to the Solar Paradise Park, where there's over 150 acres of complete solar panels in terms of being able to reduce the cost of electricity in Jamaica by this particular venture. And also the government right now in the constituency of Maikal, there are plans with the IDB funding to ensure that those islands are now pretty much in a position to be off the grid. Instead of allowing it for a natural disaster and then the infrastructure and then you have to rebuild, putting these stuff in place from now shows and pretty much paves the road and the groundwork to reduce the electricity. And I think our government has been moving diligently and forward with ensuring that is done.
Well, I will say that I think we find ourselves at a critical crossroads when it comes to power generation, power supply, and renewable energy. We'll move ahead, though. The official opposition not impressed by what they're calling an uninspiring and lackluster speech from the throne. Let's take a look.
60 minutes of recycled ideas and initiatives is how opposition leader Michael Pintard describes the Davis administration's speech from the throne. Pintard adding that over the past 2 years, the majority of the promises made in the last speech from the throne were not accomplished, and today there were additional commitments, and still, he says, key issues were missing.
On the eve of an election that this administration is going to be engaged in very shortly, there was no discussion about a failed airport development.
Also noticeably absent, Pintard says, was addressing the reduction of crime as well as the issue of immigration, those coupled with the lack of focus on the Grand Bahamian economy.
No discussion about the failed hotel sale and their abysmal performance in Dorian relief. We expected a further conversation about local government and whether or not the government had intentions of introducing local government in New Providence as they have forecasted before.
Now, while the speech focused on 5 key pillars, that is the cost of living, education, crime, healthcare, and jobs, Pintard says the speech also lacked word on anti-corruption legislation, the Freedom of Information Act, and the Ombudsman Bill. Also of concern was no mention of the marital rape bill or amendments to the Protection Against Violence bill, despite pushback from women's groups.
When we return to Parliament, the same issues that forced the government to prorogue the House are the issues we are going to start with. We have more than 60 questions related to immigration alone.
Reporting for Our News, I'm Jamila Missick.
All right, so the opposition's response coming immediately after the speech from the throne. Senator Lightburn, I'm going to start with you. You saw there the opposition saying that these things were missing from the speech from the throne. I'm going to give you an opportunity to respond.
Yeah, one of the key things that I've understood, or I learned to understand in this political realm, is that, we have to continuously move forward as a nation. I understand the role of the opposition, but I do not share the view of opposing just for opposing's sake. There's so many things that a government must do, and we need both sides of the political divide to assist. I even look at this, the National Development Plan. It was something that was brought forward by an administration. It was shelved. And these are the things that we cannot continuously move forward as a nation. These stuff must be enshrined as public policy, and the National Development Plan is one of those that the speech from the throne emphasizes, that these are some of the stuff that we must take bipartisan and not be political. Talk about we have to improve infrastructure, public policy. These are the things that we look at. So I do not completely share the view of the leader of the opposition just for opposing and opposing's sake. because I can do the same on his side in terms of the mismanagement of COVID-19, in terms of being able to not revive our economy, the dismal performance of the previous administration in those regards. But I choose to take a higher road because I want to ensure that the country moves forward and we're not squalor in this political rhetoric.
I listened with interest to Mr. Pintard's comments, but there were provisions in there for crime, immigration, and other things that he talked about. But I also, I also thought with interest, well, we're not too far out from the previous administration, which had an opportunity to address some of these things, and I keep coming back to that for a reason. But in your response, to your party's press conference yesterday.
I think that, to a certain extent, I agree with Senator Lightbourne, but I would add to that list anti-corruption legislation and the Freedom of Information Act. Those are two pieces of legislation that should not be partisan. They should be bipolitical, they should be politically neutral, and they are essential for the development of the Bahamas as we go into the next 50 years. We regret that we weren't able to pass that legislation during our administration. But again, this administration promised us a new day. And they promised, I just was showing Senator Lightbourne during the break, the promise to bring anti-corruption legislation within the first 100 days. It's in the beautifully glossy blueprint for change. These things are essential if we want to develop and mature as a political democracy.
All right. Well, when we come back, our discussion with Senators Michaela Barnett Ellis and Quinton Lightbourne continues. This is On the Record. We'll be back right after this. So the project really pays itself back.
Correct.
They set up
At the conference,
the school.
As a journalist, I always have to focus on the facts, and sometimes that means going to investigate for myself. On the Record, Thursdays at 8 p.m. right here on RTV.
Welcome back. You're watching On the Record, the speech from the throne, a senator's take. Thank you so much for staying with us. We had an opportunity to poll some Gen Zs and millennials going into yesterday's broadcast and looking at the level of interest in the opening of Parliament, speech from the throne. One of the reasons I sought to invite you all was because I wanted to have a different perspective and begin to get into the minds of the next generation of politicians and Bahamians. Do you think yesterday's exercise resonated with the generations beyond mine, younger than mine, obviously my parents, grandparents, but the generations that you represent and the millennials, the Gen Zs, do you think it resonated with them?
I think we need to do a better job at explaining what is going on. I remember when when the Parliament was prorogued in August, I spent many days explaining what the prorogation was. And we need to explain that to people so that they understand what's going on. They understand why it happens. They understand what a new session of Parliament means. Because I think we've gotten away from that. I myself, I was on the committee that went to the Governor General to invite her to come down and speak. I actually did not know that that was part of the process. So I think we need to do a better job at explaining to people what this all means in the great scheme of things, and that this is not just an opportunity to wear fancy dresses and high heels and fascinators and gloves and dust off the pantyhose
and scissors tails.
Yeah, scissors tails. We need to explain to people what it means, because I think if we do, we will get more of a buy-in. But I think for me, I want my politicians to be realistic. Like, I'm not silly. I'm reasonable. And I want my politicians to give me realistic goals, because the amount of things that they said in the speech from the throne, it's not even humanly possible to deal with all of those things. So we saw that from the first one. That's why there's so many things left over. don't promise me a mountain if all you can give me is a hill. I understand that all I can get is a hill. So just be honest with me in terms of what we are realistically going to do.
One, do you share the view that we need to educate our generations about what it is that we are doing when we do these kinds of events?
Yes, I do believe it is the role. I take it as my personal responsibility as a young parliamentarian to inform persons in my generation and younger about the role and the speech from the throne and the importance of it. But definitely, I believe it's also a responsibility of everybody to ensure and impart this knowledge and wisdom on. You know, there are a lot of Bahamians out there that, what's Parliament? What's the full details of it?
What's the point?
What's the point? And
What
so
is the
I
point?
think it's
Yeah.
very important. It's a collective team effort, or will take a collective team effort to ensure that these are things that needs to be done. This is the importance of your country. This is important. I listened to Minister Glenys Hanna Martin. She spoke about it in 1973, that zeal, that everything that they all felt at that time when they were young, and that is carried over to them now in their 60s or 70s. And so I think that void has been left in my generation. And so definitely for me, getting that zeal from my parents, understand the importance of that. But there are many others that didn't have that zeal and that appreciation. And I think that is where we have to come in as a collective group of Bahamians to ensure and educate of what we have moving forward.
And does that now translate? Because if you don't understand what happened, pay attention to what was said, have a set expectation. How then do you hold your government, your politician, your MP accountable if you don't even understand what is happening or what is to come out of that speech?
Well, I think definitely it has to also be from a media, a public relations standpoint. This government has been working diligently in ensuring that the messages are put out there. You know, for some persons may feel if they've been inundated with information and voice notes and all of this information. But I think that is the role of a government to ensure that, hey, that there's no misinformation, that you have the information and the details out there of what is going on. And I think that's very important. Also to respond to Senator Barnett Ellis' point in regards to terms of being realistic. We all know we live in a real practical world. We know that no politician is perfect, no government is perfect, there are flaws. But in terms of being able to listen to the needs and demands of people and being able to fulfill them, and I think that's the difference in terms of moving forward.
So is this, in your opinion, is this speech then an answer to what people want or what they're asking for? Do you think the speech from the throne and the proposed legislation is the answer to what people, answering the cries of what people want?
Yes, it's answering some of the answers. Like there was a national breakfast program that was started, cut, stop, review, cancel, whatever it was. Now we're bringing it back because of the importance that it is for young persons to be able to have a hot meal, to be able to be filled, go to school, get a good education. These are things, protecting the vulnerable. In the speech from the throne, they even spoke about the importance of protecting the vulnerable in terms of seniors, being able to provide those necessities for them in their golden years. And I think these are some of the things that every day-to-day Bahamians talk about, but they're not actually done. And this government has been taking the steps to ensure that that is done. There's no excuse to me why a national breakfast program should have been canceled underneath any administration.
So here's my question then. Why do we have to legislate things that obviously make sense? Are we just that politically divided that we have to put it into legislation in order for it to exist? So Senator Ellis, I'm going to ask you that question.
You know, so obviously I'm a lawyer and so I'm biased, and I think legislation is extremely important, right? I also appreciate though that it slows the process down. But I find that people work better when there are clear-cut parameters in terms of what we're doing and what we're not doing. Now, I don't want to say, it doesn't sound like they're passing legislation to deal with the breakfast program. That sounds like that was an announcement or a confirmation of a public policy that has started, that got underway this week. I don't think they're passing legislation to deal with it. But I think that legislation provides certainty. And in any jurisdiction, in any economy, in any contract, certainty is extremely important.
One area that I really was pleased to hear that, will be put into legislation and something that obviously will cause it to carry on and exist beyond a particular government is the National Development Plan, which you
Yes.
mentioned. I think that's a very good thing because for a long time, it's been bandied back and forth depending on who's in, or we'll extract pieces from, and there was no national development plan that people can look to and say, this is what we're moving towards. So for me, personally, I thought it was a great idea.
And, sorry.
No, I was going to say that is an example of an initiative that was in the previous speech from the throne that's been repeated in this one. We need to come together to talk about a national plan. We need to come together. I can't say that, I can't say that enough. And I think that we need to be sufficiently politically mature that the Bahamas is for all of we, and we need to come together so we all have an understanding. Because I'm sure Senator Lightbourne will tell you, in working with people, when you involve people in the process, they buy in and they participate. They participate in the process as opposed to something being handed to them already fixed and done. When you involve them in the process, they buy into it. It makes life a lot easier.
So the National Development Plan is nothing new. It was developed. It was researched. It went to every family island. I personally know persons that worked diligently and for years on this plan.
We spent a lot of money.
A lot of time.
Yes.
So there's
A
no
lot of
need
money.
to go back to get consultation and listen to this one. That was already done. The previous administration came in and didn't take a look at it. Didn't care to follow it. Didn't care to follow up on whatever the institution and the establishment of it. And this is where myself as a younger politician, look at it. We have to become and be better than that. We're talking about a national development plan that was a plan for 2030, 2040, 2050, about how we will improve our country. But because of some political affiliations or some feelings that was caught, that we put it on the side. And that is my view. That is my representation as a young person in politics, that we have to rise beyond that. And something like the National Development Plan, and I'm happy that this administration is enshrining it in law. That is going to be legislation to show that it's not scrapped in the future.
Well, we're going to be looking for that legislation. As mentioned, it doesn't make sense to keep moving it from one speech to the next.
Yes.
Because it sounds good, but it has to be.
It has to be.
It has to now, come to Parliament and be debated and then go into law.
Well, I'm sure we will do it.
Okay, looking forward to it. Back to
They
this.
said that 2 years ago.
I'm sure we would do it.
2 years ago.
Now,
They
I'll
said
only
2
do
years
it
ago.
if
I know what administration
one
won't.
year from now.
2 years ago, that's what they said they would do too, and yet here we are still mentioning it.
One year from now, if we have not seen that legislation, we can have another discussion. All right. So the speech also mentioned the importance of job creation and education in promoting personal security. Elaborate on the government's strategies and proposed legislation to boost job opportunities and improve educational outcomes for all Bahamians.
Okay, very good. This government has already been moving forward to resolve this problem. The unemployment rate has been the lowest it's been in a very long time in our country. We've been able to restore the economy, the opening of the cruise port. Over $2 billion have been approved at the Bahamas Investment Authority. With the country has been able to secure economic rebound, and it's evident. And I think that's returned to also at the Bahamas Development Bank and providing entrepreneurs with the opportunity to develop develop their businesses. And these are the things that a progressive government is all about. And it's evident so far look at our economic numbers, based on our projections, unemployment, all of these stuff are up. Our GDP is up, our GMP is up. This is what we're doing as a progressive government to move our country forward.
How do you argue with signs of success that he has laid out, that's laid out in the speech? How do you come back and say it's more of the same?
So, I commend them for creating opportunities for more people to become businessmen and entrepreneurs, but also let's make doing business easier. We saw at the beginning of the year the backlog with the business licenses because Inland Revenue required additional information they hadn't done before. People were not prepared with the information. It caught them off guard. Let's make doing business in the Bahamas better. I remember when many years ago when I became a lawyer, one of the surveys that I filled out for the World Bank was a doing business in the Bahamas survey, right? And we looked at the processes that we have to go through to get things done, it is very discouraging and frustrating for entrepreneurs and business owners. I mean, if you talk to them now, especially the cost of electricity, we're narrowing profit margins, and it's becoming a lot more difficult to do business in the Bahamas. And the Chamber of Commerce routinely, almost now, is putting out statements asking the government to make the Bahamas more business friendly.
And coming from that business background as well, doing business in this country is difficult. It is really difficult and it's challenging, and it's not so much the startup, it's just trying to get your license, and you've got to have your TIN numbers, you've got to be compliant, and it's not, I don't think that people don't want to do it, It's just sometimes the frustration of trying to get it, done. And so, definitely in that point. I do want, though, to focus a little bit on education. I'll start with you, Senator Ellis. Do you think this speech addressed the need for education or educational improvements enough?
The funny thing about education is we always want more. I want to see more. I have a daughter who's just started high school. We endured
high school.
I know, right?
Oh wow!
we endured the remote learning for 2.5 years, and it was extremely rough. And one of the things that I have learned as a mother is that students learn differently, and I want to make opportunities. I think we as a country need to create opportunities so that more kids can get evaluated and tested, because our kids are bright. Our kids are extremely smart, but they're not all necessarily learning in the same way. And I hope to see legislation that deals with that. I welcome the return of the breakfast program. I think it's very important. I know I don't function well without any breakfast. And the school, postgraduate school for people with disabilities, yes. I think that is extremely important, so that they can continue to be and show that they're just simply differently abled and be contributing members of our community.
There are certain pieces of legislation that really, proposed legislation that caught my eye in the speech that I want to speak to. The National Maritime and Instruction Bill, the National Apprenticeship Bill, the National Youth Commission Bill, National Service Bill. All of those to me really speak to the development of young people. And Senator Lightbourne, I'll ask you to speak to that for a moment. But what's the thinking behind this? It seems to be a lot of focus on these things that will help to improve the opportunities for our young people.
Yes, I think a special focus and emphasis has been placed on youth in our country, especially from an educational standpoint, and being able to fully reopen schools. That we've had a 2-year educational gap that is a deficit, and we have to make up for that. Those are the things. And also, if you notice in the speech from the throne, they also spoke about the establishment of a special school for the arts. Because we have to realize, performing arts, because we realize that there are many cross-sections of individuals. I grew up in a time where, you want to go up to school, you got to be a doctor, lawyer, accountant.
Yes.
And boy, I ain't spending no money for you to do this or do that.
Imagine telling them you want to be a journalist.
I'm a lawyer, so
And so as we've evolved, right, and I've realized that we have such a beautiful country, beautiful amounts of talent throughout the archipelago. And being able to have a performing arts school to develop so many different facets of everyone, how Senator Ellis spoke about how every child learns differently.
Yes.
We had Sir Sidney Poitier. No performing arts schools, eh? Imagine if we had some of those stuff in place for our videographers, our actors, so many dancers, so many different things that they can evolve on, and realizing that, hey, education is not just the field of academia, but the field of arts, and that can move our country so much more forward, and unimaginably success that we can have.
Untold story, I actually wanted to be an actor and a dancer. I'm just putting it out there. There was no school for me to go to. And my mother said, boy, you think I got money to waste. But anyway, who knows what would have happened. But the point is, it is progress. And in a modern society, these are the things that we need to be and should be addressing. Now, the speech also, even my team is still laughing at the speech also highlighted the impact of global factors. such as the Russian invasion of Ukraine, disruptions from COVID-19 pandemic, and these disruptions on the economy. How does the government mitigate these external challenges to ensure our economic stability? I mean, COVID-19 was probably the most blaring example of how fragile the economy is to external and global shocks. So what do we do as a country to ensure this economic stability? And before you answer, because to me, we had a lot of discussions about diversifying the economy and, how to feed ourselves. And the moment we opened back up, it was business as usual. We dove right back into tourism. Numbers are great. Everybody's happy. We even ain't having that discussion no more. But again, what does the government do to try and mitigate against those external challenges?
I think we're definitely fixing and trying to fix those, right? You look at the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister is dubbed as a global figure in terms of trying to increase the awareness of global and climate change, of renewable energies. These are the things that the Prime Minister has taken away from our shores to ensure that we can be able to be a sustainable country in this world that we live in. And, there is going to be a lot of challenges that must happen in regards to that. But the Prime Minister and this administration is moving forward to show that how we plan to diversify, talk about renewable. These are some of the things that me as a younger person that I want to see and I want to hear from my leader talking about renewable energy, not about grandiose ideas and fabricated stories of what can happen. But I really want to see him, and he's doing that on a global and national stage of how we're going to move our country forward in terms from an energy perspective.
Senator Ellis, do you agree, disagree?
I mean, I'm just grateful that we are admitting that the pandemic was worldwide and that, economies around the world suffered as a result of the pandemic, because for a very long time, this administration made it sound as if, the previous administration, the Minnis administration, COVID was all of our fault. The lockdown was all our fault. The shutdown in schools, it only happened in the Bahamas and it didn't happen anywhere else in the world. All economies right now are looking to have rebounded and looking to rebuild. In terms of diversifying the economy, one of the things, unfortunately, I missed the debate on the nurses and midwives bill. But, our nurses are coveted around the world. They are snatching them up. We need to create a medical tourism so that we train more nurses here so that they don't just have to come to us for our Bahamian nurses. We can train Cuban nurses here. We can train nurses from around the Caribbean here. And so there are also options for people to, to take and poach, really. But we need to diversify the way that we are doing things.
Yeah, I think that we are diversifying. One of the key things, right? I'm not a person, I don't like to linger in the past, but I cannot in good conscience sit here and let Senator Michael Barnett Ellis, just say that COVID-19 was not just in the Bahamas. We understood and we knew that it was a global pandemic. But when you send Roll and Smith to the food store at the same time, that's your decision. When you come on TV and tell us that we got to be locked down in 2 hours, that was a decision by the government. This government, once we were campaigning, we said we were going to provide free COVID testing. Right away. The government at the time said, oh, that's a pie in the sky. We came in, and within the 100 days, that was done. So we are government, we have done things, and we will continue to do these things. And so I just want that to be known to the Bahamian public, that that's what we're all about. We're about being progressive, bringing change, and doing stuff that is beneficial for the Bahamian society and public at large.
Folks, I think we are at the point of taking a break. When we come back, we're going to continue our discussion on the speech from the throne. Stay with us. We'll be back with more on the record right after this. So the project really pays itself back.
Correct.
They set up
At the conference,
the school.
As a journalist, I always have to focus on the facts, and sometimes that means going to investigate for myself. On the Record, Thursdays at 8 p.m. right here on RTV.
Welcome back to our final segment of On the Record. Thanks for spending the evening with us. The reopening of Parliament went off without a hitch, but there was also some drama after the Coalition of Independents showed up loudly protesting the Davis administration.
From the pomp and pageantry inside the air-conditioned tent to the outside on Bay Street, the historic and solemn occasion interrupted this morning as the Coalition of Independents leader Lincoln Bain led a group of supporters for a protest. The crowd of protesters making a scene as the House of Parliament reopened just feet away, calling for the removal of the Prime Minister as well as a sitting cabinet minister. When asked what led them to Bay Street this morning, Bain had this response.
We are just protesting over senior officers who were hurt. This is a violation, but we decided that even though we have the rights, we will comply. So people can see that we are compliant. We're not here to cause any trouble, we're here to make a statement.
Bain contends that they have every right to assemble. And while police officers allowed them to gather, Bain says holding placards is where officers drew the line. As to his next steps following this morning's protest.
After this, we are going into full campaign mode in order to go and try to bring some relief for the people of West End and Grand Bahama. But we're going to go over there and try to do something for a community that has been really, really broken for a long and neglected for a long time.
I noticed your deputy to contest that seat. Have you selected a candidate to contest that seat?
We're going to announce, we have selected a candidate. We're going to announce it in short order.
And to those that label the coalition as a group of troublemakers.
Finland was a troublemaker. Manu Butler was a troublemaker. Martin Luther King was a troublemaker. Malcolm X was a troublemaker. Mahatma Gandhi was a troublemaker. Jesus was a troublemaker. There never will be change unless you break some eggs to make your omelet.
Reporting for Our News, I'm Megan Shepherd.
All right, so as the opening of Parliament is taking place, you have this group of protesters. Coalition of Independents, led by Lincoln Bain, has been very critical of both the Davis and the former administration. Your thoughts?
You know, we have enshrined in our Constitution the freedom of expression and freedom to assemble, but it comes with conditions, and one of those conditions means that it must not be contrary to national security. There are procedures in place to make sure that we can protest peacefully and assemble peacefully, and we need to respect that. It's not, you can't go out there and do whatever you want and say whatever you want. That's not in the interest of the Bahamian people in any way, shape, or form.
I agree that every Bahamian has the right to demonstrate or protest. One of the key things that, myself and persons from our generation, still the order of the day is respect and decorum. We spoke about earlier about the passing of Minister Wilshcombe and all these stuff. I saw one of the placards just now. It was like "Fire Keith Bell," and so it's such an angry chant. Let's keep in mind that this minister's wife has just passed. Mm-hmm. She hasn't even been buried as yet. Mm-hmm. And so to see that, it invokes so many different emotions and feelings for me. Mm-hmm. Because these are some of the things that I think we have to raise the bar in terms of our political discourse, in terms of being respectful and understanding that, hey, at the end of the day, these individuals, these men and women are humans. They have families just like you and me. And so that's the nature for me in terms of, I have no issue with the demonstration. I want to make that abundantly clear. But I just believe that a certain level of decorum and understanding and in getting a greater appreciation of what everyone is going through before you take some stuff too far, in my opinion.
What is the responsibility of the politician today? Because a lot of times politicians will use these opportunities to go after other politicians, and then of course once it turns on them, then it becomes problematic. So what is the responsibility of the politician, whether a sitting or opposition politician, to ensure that we bring the right kind of behavior to our disagreements? Because I've seen a whole lot of stuff out there that is fueled by both sides when it's convenient for them.
I think that we as individuals and as collectives need to make the active decision that we are going to be responsible politicians. Because again, the voters have changed. The voters are different. Voters, like Quentin Lightbourne and myself, we aren't interested in the mudslinging. We aren't interested with, the dirt and who's sleeping with who. What we're interested in is the development of our nation and making the Bahamas a better place. And how can we bring these BPL bills down? How can we reduce the level of crime? How can we live in a Bahamas where we can raise our sons and our daughters and they feel safe and that they have economic opportunities? That's what we need to focus on, but we have to set the example ourselves. And I think it comes down from leadership. I can speak to our leadership team. We've made it abundantly clear. Okay, we are in a period of mourning. Minister Wilsham's death has been felt by all of us, and we need to give it the respect and courtesy that it deserves. Now is not the time to throw. Now is not the time to throw mud. Let's be human.
A cabinet colleague's lost his wife.
Yes.
And so that's my view. Definitely the role of parliamentarians and politicians in this new day and age is very different from yesteryear. Being able to understand the concerns of the demographic of our Bahamian citizens and realizing that, hey, everybody is different. There's a certain sector, obviously the coalition has their grouping, right? But we have to understand that the Bahamas is bigger than some persons that feel as if that there is automatic and or $100,000 is supposed to be given to you every month or annually or however it was worded or crafted. We live in the Bahamas where I believe the electorate now wants to see realistic and practical things achieved, not a pie in the sky, and realizing that we have to put a plan together to achieve that. And that is what governments have been doing, especially this present government has been doing, to show that, hey, change takes time. Nothing happens in one day, and every step we take getting closer and closer to our ultimate goal of making this country a better place.
Let's get back to the speech on the throne a bit and some of the things that were outlined in that. A new Urban Renewal Authority bill, legislation for crime fighting and rehabilitation. Supreme Court justices increased to 5, and the Court Services Bill removing central government oversight. Senator
So
Ellison.
3 of those bills I think are extremely important. I'd like to discuss. First, the urban renewal and creating a statutory framework for that. That is long overdue. Again, that was promised in the previous speech from the throne, so hopefully they're able to deliver it this go round. The Court Services Bill and another bill that they talked about, the Legal Profession Bill, are bills that have been knocking around. I want to say definitely Court Services has been knocking around for at least 10 years, and the legal profession...
From your party's administration.
From my party's administration. The Legal Profession Bill, I feel like we have been drafting that a million years because it needs to be updated. And my hope is that the government brings those pieces of legislation as drafted. Don't give it the gender-based violence treatment. Don't switch it up at the last minute. Please give us the bills that have been drafted by the stakeholders and the professionals in that area. We've put a lot of time and energy into them, and they are extremely badly needed.
To the point that a lot of this legislation or proposed legislation has been pulled forward. Any guarantees that we will see it actually come to the floor of the House this time?
Yes, on the speech from the throne, these are some of the things that will be seen at the legislative and at the House of Parliament, because this is what we're all about. One of the key things, the urban renewal. The Progressive Liberal Party has been in government that has been able to institute so many programs that have transcended and transformed our country. Urban renewal, National Development Plan, all of these things, National Youth Guard now, these are stuff that we've all know and see the benefit of it. And we once again will be the government to ensure that it's enshrined in law to be fulfilled and to help future generations. And that is what I look at. A government that's been able to put in place these initiatives that will move our country forward. And I'm happy that it will happen. Yes, some of those were mentioned in the first speech from the throne, but I'm certain without a shadow of a doubt that these institutions that we started and we put in place, that they will be enshrined into law.
Another piece of legislation or proposed legislation that caught my attention was the anti-gang legislation, as well as measures to combat cybercrime. Again, trying to bring some order and relief to the crime situation that we are facing. And cybercrime really is a now issue as far as I'm concerned. It's a huge issue. Again, any guarantees that we're going to see that legislation come to the House?
Yeah, so definitely drafters are working on it. The cyber, that's a very huge. There was a financial institution in the States, right, that had a hacking, right, where over $200 million of personal information was hacked and disseminated on the internet. These are things that we as a progressive government must be ahead of the curve. And these are some of the things that's going in place. Even bring it down to a micro or small level where you have bullying tactics that are going on a very level in terms of high school. And these are the things that must be addressed to protect the vulnerable inside our society, especially our children.
Are these the kinds of things you are looking to have some kind of collaboration? Are you hoping the government will come and sit with the opposition and other groups to get your input on these things?
I'm hoping. Cybercrime is a very wide body of crime, so I'm hoping that we get more particulars in terms of what type of cybercrime that we are going to deal with. I know one thing that the police are dealing with a lot right now are fraudulent checks. And people, scanning checks, lifting signatures, and all of that stuff. I'm hoping to see some legislation about that. I noticed that the central bank yesterday put out a statement in that they're pushing back the deadline, the time for, ending with checks, which is concerning for me because right now the check fraud that we're seeing around is insane,
Interesting. How much of this, though, and achieving these goals is based on unity and a unified political body? You're obviously different from different political parties with different ideologies. Some people will argue and say the same, but that's a show for another day. But how much of this is predicated on unity and cooperation? And I'm asking you all specifically because to me, you represent a different generation of politicians.
I think that we need to be politically mature enough to be able to have a conversation. Because I think that right now, the FNM, particularly under Michael Pintard, we don't complain for complaining's sake. We don't protest for protesting sake. We are offering suggestions because we would like to be a part of the process. This is a Bahamas that we all live in. This is not just a Bahamas for PLP or Bahamas for FNM. We are all under this legislation. And so when we raise points like, okay, I see you have this legislation, what is the budgetary allotment? Because you're promising, for example, 5 judges, but that means you have to staff them, cars, spaces. How are you going to do that? What's the budget allotment? It's not in this budget, so are we putting it in next budget? Those are healthy questions and necessary questions, and so we need to have a government that is going to listen. And of course, the response is going to be, but y'all didn't do it when you were in power. You know what? We need to start afresh. If this is going to be a new day, let's actually make it a new day where you listen to the other side and take note of the contributions. You can't just simply be dismissive and say, I think the Deputy Prime Minister, when asked about why proroguing, said, we're in the government and we will do as we seem fit. This is the Bahamas for all of us. Let's have the conversation.
Jerome, I agree. We are the government of the Bahamas. The present government of the Bahamas has always been about the people and being ensured that their voices are heard and legislation is brought to Parliament that is in their best interest. Once we have a democratic process and we go to election, the people have selected a government that wants to represent them. We've always stayed true to that and understood that appreciation, that the service is to the people and that they've afforded us this opportunity to serve them. One of the key things I've seen in my initial stages in Parliament is that persons in opposition, some of them may rant and rave, but 95% of the bills presented, they've approved and they've agreed. So it shows that, hey, some persons want to make noise, but at the end of the day, they still support the legislation that was brought to Parliament. And that shows some maturity. But I also think that it has to go to another level where you have to be able to let the Bahamian people know that, hey, these are some of the things that we have to partner together. And I just hope, I guess some persons may say I live in utopia, I have these utopic thoughts, but certain programs, certain initiatives should be an incentive where we all stand together to say, okay, we want to move this country forward. And despite our political divide, despite our differences, this is what we want to see moving forward.
So can I, sorry,
Go ahead.
I don't want to go over time, but Senator Lightbourne is correct. And one of the ways we saw this was in the late Minister Obie Wilshcombe, when we talked about the Protection Against Violence bill, and the opposition and the women's stakeholders all voiced a complaint about it. He then met with the groups and listened to our concerns and took note of that. And so I hope that, you know, as a tribute to his legacy, that we continue that process, because he appreciated that sometimes the other side has something important to say, and they have some valuable points, so let's take note of it.
You are not the reservoir of all the answers
Yes.
to the world's problems.
Yes.
That is so true. As we are out of time, Senators, first of all, thank you for agreeing to come on today. I think what you represent for me is an opportunity to change business as usual in politics. I encourage you to continue to have the debates, but let's come together to find solutions as a country. And for me, it doesn't matter where it comes from, you know. I don't care who has the answer. I don't care who came up with the answer. I just want to see it done. And I think that's the thing for most Bahamians. And hopefully we'll get to a point as a country where we see our politicians disagree, but still walk out in a unified front, because that's very, very important.
Extremely important.
We only need to look to our neighbors to the north to see what happens when you allow political chaos to take over and to disagree just for the point of disagreeing, because it now all plummets into chaos. So thank you very much. All the best to you. You've got the debate on the speech from the throne is coming, and then of course we'll be looking to see these pieces of legislation coming forward, and certainly you're invited to come back and talk at any time.
Thank you.
All the best. Well, we've enjoyed. We hope that you've enjoyed our show tonight. Special thanks to our guests and the entire On the Record team, and of course to you, the audience, for watching. Once again, I'm your host, Jerome Sawyer. See you next time on The Record.